Reload again.
We're going live.
Music. Jovencito, un momentito. Ahora sí, ahora sí. Sí, compartimos sonido, compartimos video y vamos live.
Que quiera fotocopia, que dé la vuelta nomás. Tiene que hacer la vuelta. La vuelta mismo.
Caballero, nosotros vamos acá, ya nosotros nos reunieron, vamos acá a hacer un papel.
Por la parte de las carteras,
ya.
está el ingreso hacia el interior.
Ya, muchas gracias.
Así que los que quieran sacar fotocopias, fotos,
si atendieran a uno así allá
por San Antonio, donde está la zona de las carteras, por favor.
All right. Shall we begin? Well, welcome everyone. Welcome everyone that is watching via the YouTube stream. Welcome everyone that is inside of this inside of this Zoom link. I'm going to be talking about all of you in a bit. And also welcome to all of you that are going to be seeing this as a recording, maybe later today, maybe tomorrow, maybe in a year, maybe in the next century. We don't know. We don't know how long these data things are going to be living. Welcome to Disobedience. Latin America is not a territory, it's an idea. And this is going to be a conversation in between Libia, Bianibi, Nadie, which is comprised of Jorge, Sarmiento, and Juan Bocanegra, Michel, Poblete, Carlos, Salazar, Lermont, and Yunyu, Shih. Before we get into the nitty gritty of the talk, we just want to get some housekeeping out of the way. And also, I'm going to be giving a very brief context of what this talk is going to be about. First of all, this space is happening thanks to the curatorial practice department at MICA. So special thanks to Jose Ruiz, who's the director. He couldn't join us right now because he's doing what directors do. You know, they're directing here and there, recruiting and all that stuff. But still, if you're watching the recording, thank you so much, Jose, for your support with this class, with this event, and in general, for just being the awesome human being that you are. And also talking about amazing human beings, we also want to thank our intercultural practices class for the spring of 21. That is Teresa Schwambui, David Alpert, Megan Klink, Nia Ricks, Eliza Riegel, Julia Selyavsky, Hone Selassie, and Yeshide Washington. And if I butchered any of your last names, my apologies. I'll improve. Next, we also want to share that both the intercultural practices class that is happening up until this point, and this event has been hosted by Sur. And yes, we were formerly known as 418 or 418, you know, we're like Prince. So we have Prince and the artist formerly known as Prince. So that's us, Sur, formerly known as 418. And right now the team at Sur is comprised of Santiago Rodriguez, Felipe Rodriguez, and Nico Rodriguez. And no, we're not all related, although some of our members are. You'll be hearing from them throughout the talk today, but it's important for all of you to meet the team. Now, I also want to give you like some visuals of the folks that are going to be the stars tonight, and we're going to be in the spotlight tonight. Joining us from all across different places and representing all across different places. As I mentioned, we have Libia Bianibi, originally from Mexico, joining us via Chicago. We have Jorge Restrepo and Juan Bocanegra, which together comprise the collective Nadie, joining us from Colombia via Bogota. We have Michel Poblete Montoya, joining us from Chile. And I didn't ask you beforehand if you're in Santiago. My apologies for that. We have Carlos Salazar Lermont from Venezuela, joining us via St. Louis. And we have Yunyu Shih joining us from Taiwan via, I haven't asked that either, so my apologies for that. So before I renounce the stage, and I promise you will not see me that much after I've done this, after the introductions, I just want to give a very short kind of setting up the rules of play for today's conversation, and also give you a little bit of a framework so all of us, we can be on the same page. So the format for today's talk, each one of our presenters are going to have 5 minutes to do an opening statement, right? And the opening statement is going to go in accordance to this framework that I'm about to present, right? After each one of our speakers have their 5 minutes to do their initial statement, then we're going to engage into an open conversation, right? And this is where all of you play a role, right? If you're inside of the Zoom call, feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question or participate in the conversation, right? Likewise, if you're watching us via YouTube, feel free to slap as many questions as you want. And Santi is going to be taking care of moving those from the YouTube stream into our Zoom call, right? So once again, we encourage you to engage as much as possible and to ask as many questions as possible. Um, so now a little bit of framework here. Oh, my apologies. I think I mispronounced the name of Jorge Restrepo for the Nadie. My apologies for that, Jorge. I know a Jose Restrepo, so my apologies for that. All right. So what we're seeing here is América Invertida, or America Upside Down, from Joaquín Torres Garcia. And this is from 1943. Time flies by. It's going to be a century since this went out. Um, and Torres Garcia was an Uruguayan artist who, you know, as many of us, went outside of the confines of its country, of its continent, to pursue an education, to pursue a professional career. And then when he came back to this territory, he was very aggressive about how other people were seeing the territory of Latin America, right? And he basically was one of the first ones to propose that the art of South and Latin America should be defined in its own terms rather than in relation to the North, right? North being a bigger notion of the North, you know, being Eurocentric canons, right? And this is something that has been central in the class that we've been teaching, and also is going to be central in this conversation. You know, being from Latin America means being constantly defined by an other. You know, and we say other with a capital O, because you know this definition happens politically, culturally, socially, and many multiple realms, right? And because of this, we experience kind of like a fragmented identity inside of this strange territory that we call Latin America, right? As a response to that strangeness and to that fragmented identity, we have learned to navigate it by responding to it, you know. And for the purposes of this talk, I know that there's different ways and different strategies that have been used to respond to this. So these four that we're using for this talk are not the only ones, but for the purposes of this event, we're talking about improvisation, we're talking about invention, we're also talking about reinvention, and also reconstruction, right? Once again, there are plenty more, but these are the four ones that we want to kind of like make an emphasis on during this event as tools and as strategies that we use to, you know, constantly battle this definition, right? It seems like coming from this territory is being doomed to have your fate being determined for you, right? And what we want to make an emphasis on is that there's strategies in which, you know, we can have some disobedience to one's fate. You know, we can be disobedient with the way that it's being imposed on us, that we should facilitate ourselves and facilitate our societies, right? Now, this guy that you're seeing here is Ernesto Orosa. He's a Cuban artist. Ernesto could be the subject of its own whole class, of its own whole public event, so I'm going to try to be brief about him. But one of the key concepts that we want you to have in mind is that he explores the concept of technological disobedience, right? So according to Orosa, technological disobedience was a social and cultural response to the geopolitical isolation that was forced upon Cuba in the second half of the 20th century, right? I'm going to make an emphasis on a couple of words. This geopolitical isolation was forced upon Cuba, right? So going back again to the concept of things that are forced upon us, right? So according to Orosa, technological disobedience embraced improvisation, invention, reinvention, and repairing as strategies of survival throughout decades of scarcity. And also, there's one funny thing that Orosa says is that Cubans have pulled fans, ventilation fans, so much that then when they see a fan, they don't see a unit in itself, but they don't see the parts, right? But to kind of like paraphrase exactly what he says that all of the symbols that unify an object, that make it a unique entity, for a Cuban, they don't exist, right? So the symbols that unify an object and that make it an entity, they don't exist for Cubans, right? What he says is that the Cuban completely disobeys this. And this is taken from Technological Disobedience in Cuba, right? For the purposes of this talk, we want to make an emphasis on this quote, but we want to make some slight variations to it, right? So what we're proposing for today is that all of the symbols that unify a territory, let's say Latin America for today, that make it a unique entity for Latinoamericanos, they don't exist. Latinoamericanos completely disobey this, right? So just keep those in mind. Um, what Orosa is proposing to us is that by breaking our limitations, and we have a lot of limitations, right? We have aesthetic limitations, we have legal limitations, we have economic limitations, just to name a few, but there's other limitations, right? But as we break those limitations, what we're achieving is a moral liberation, right? So it's always the cycle of trying to go against these things that are forced upon us to achieve some level of a moral liberation, right? And that brings us to the title of today's talk and to the moment in which I'm going to step down and give it to one of our first speakers. Um, that's the spirit that we want to bring to this idea of Latin America is not a territory, it's an idea, right? We want to explore how do we disobey and how do we reconstruct the boundaries of this territory called Latin America? How do people from this territory that maybe are not operating from this territory or operating somewhere else, are proposing strategies to again disobey and reconstruct those boundaries, right? And that is our topic for today. With that, I'll give it to Santi, who is going to be introducing our first speaker for the day.
Thank you, Nico. So our first speaker is Libia Bianibi from Mexico. Libia is a Zapotec immigrant from Juchitán, Oaxaca, living in Chicago since 2016. She's currently the Associate Director of Finance and Policy at Arts Alliance Illinois, and also serves as a board member of For Enrich Chicago and a 2020 Chicago United for Equity Fellow. Welcome, Libia. You can begin whenever you want.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. I'm going to be the nerd that reads out a statement because otherwise I will not stop rambling. So apologies if you see my face going somewhere else. So as Nico and Santiago mentioned, my name is Libia Bianibi and I came to the US in 2016 from the state of Oaxaca in southern Mexico. I am an arts administrator who used to be an art historian. My interests when I was doing research started in the analysis of cultural appropriation of indigenous textiles by fashion as a form of neo-colonization. And currently I am a staff member at Arts Alliance Illinois, which is an arts policy organization. I'm also on the board of Enrich Chicago, which is an organization working to advance anti-racism in Chicago arts organizations. And I've also sit on the mayor of Chicago's Equity Council. I say this because in all of these roles, I have focused on advocating on behalf of immigrant artists and for racial equity when it comes to the creation of policies. In my experience, I have found two common threads as to how the world around me expects me to engage with it. First, in the United States framework of identity, I am consistently racialized based on my political identity as a Latin American immigrant. Here, I become Latina in every space that I enter. Never mind that I flinch at the term for its lack of nuance and its deep violence of erasure that goes unrecognized most of the time. I say this because I'm indigenous. I'm Zapotec, to be precise. I was born and raised under indigenous customs, spoke Zapotec as a native language, and went through my own process of colonization where I lost my language because public school forbade speaking anything other than Spanish or dressing in any other clothes than Western clothes. For me, life has been a process of forgetting my culture to the benefit of a unified Mexican identity, relearning it to ground myself, and remixing it to claim my own self-determination. Every time someone refers to me as Latina, the resentment that I have to this never-ending process of disobedience just shows right on my face. The second thing that happens is when I identify as indigenous, or even without that, when the conversation turns towards indigenous issues. In Mexico and in this country, there is a vision of indigenous peoples as magical objects, not a person with a history, but a remnant of nature's evolution. I also see it when people want to talk to me about my elders, my connection to land, or my spiritualism. Topics that betray an understanding of my identity as worthwhile because of its culture, and not merely because we also have a right to exist, to change, and to thrive after being persecuted and murdered by the same governments that profit off of our cultures. I see it in natural history museum exhibits or in the pre-Columbian sections of encyclopedic museums. Somehow, we never seem to find our way to the contemporary wing, but all those artists that came after and learned from us are always at the forefront. Many times I have been told that I can't have it both ways. I am asked what I want, if not recognition of indigenous peoples, never mind where it happens. So what I say is that what I want is the right to self-determination and the right to reinvention. So I'm looking forward to this conversation. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Livia, so much. Wow, so much to unpack. We'll get to that.
Next up is Michel Poblete Montoya from Chile, from Santiago. Michel is a sound artist that has worked in concerts, theater plays, radio stations, dubbing studios, and audio post-production. His work includes soundscapes, interactive installations, mediating between the sound, the material, and the listener. Currently, he's dedicated to sound design and podcast post-production and independent art projects. He studied sound engineering, graduated from Universidad Tecnológica Vicente Pérez Rosales, sound art at the Faculty of Arts of University of Chile, and has a master's degree in sound art at University of Barcelona. Michel?
¿Me escuchan? So, hi everyone. Thank you for inviting me. Sorry if my English is a little bit rusty, but I've been living in Santiago, Chile, last few years, so I will try my best. So, think about disobedience to me is Nico, please, the first picture. That thing. Do you think you rule yourself? That was the single question that my mom used to say to me when I didn't what she wanted to do. So when I was at that time, like at 6 years old, I didn't understand what it means. So to put that in the context, that was in Chile at the 80s. We were under a military dictatorship that governs by crime and fear 17 years. More than 3,000 people died and many are still missing. So in the 90s, our democracy made a deal with the Pinochet regime. So we will maintain the same economic system, his constitution, and the justice will be done, maybe if it's possible. So back to the question. If I thought that I ruled myself, of course, in that time, nobody did that. So I start to think, what is that answer when you are six years old? So what kind of answer wants she? So if I say no, okay, my rules my life, so that's a lie. So if I say yes, that means maybe I got the control. So I remember that time, that was a crack. It was like, maybe there is something bigger than the control of the biggest authority in my life when I was 6 years old. That was my mom. So it was kind of inner power or special power. So where it's come from? Intuition, it happens to somebody else. Maybe it's my culture, maybe it's in my blood. So, Nico, please, second one. I thought, okay, it's my blood. I would say that the special power to rule myself comes from our Mapuche ancestors and they has been the brave people till today, the only ones that never surrendered to the Spanish invaders and are resisting till today. So there are already almost 1 million people living down south, trying to recover their land stolen more than 100 years ago by the Chilean army. So today that land is part of the Chilean private forest industry. And they have a kind of cosmovision very special to us. So I start to believe that probably it was there, because I don't have any answers. So where it comes from my special powers to rule myself when I was 6. Okay, so they want their land back. They want respect. They want justice and self-determination. So their own rules. They want to rule themselves. So I want to believe that was the reason of my behavior when I was a kid. So Nico. So this is an artifact from Nicanor Parra, one of the greatest Chilean artists from the 20th century. So that was a very sad truth. Like, we are a mix. We are not Mapuche and we are not Spanish. So, okay, so we are Chileans. However, one day, like now, like a couple of years ago, in Santiago, our capital, something started to boil. A simple thing like the authorities raise the price of the subway ticket. So our young students say no. The reason why, because those kids were trying to rule themselves. So Nico. That was October 2019. It was the beginning of kind of weird revolution to us. So they start to jump the payment on the subway station, saying, evade, don't pay, is another way to fight. So after a week, we were more than 2 million people in the streets of the whole country. Nico? That is the main street of my city, the 25th of October. So, okay, every day there were riots somewhere. We felt fear because we didn't know how we will stop it. Police officers, of course, start to violate human rights again. We lost more than 400 eyes because the police officers shot guns, but the people was still on the streets. We were fighting for better retreatment pensions, education, public health, social rights, and the end of the Pinochet Constitution. That was our goal. A month later, something that was impossible to reach in 30 years for every single democratic government after the dictatorship happened. We got an election where we could choose if we want a new constitution created by us for the first time in 200 years of history as republic. The 78% of the Chilean population say, I approve. Our constitutional convention will be 50% of men and 50% of women. And of course, we have some seats reserved for our ancestors. So we are still in that process, and our hope is to get our own rules, to rule ourselves. So the last one, Nico, please. Can you see that flag on top? Okay. Yes, it was the main of our symbols. I was there, and I will say that there were more Mapuche flags than Chilean flags. Probably, I don't know why, but now we know that the Chilean state is with them. Now we share blood. Now we know how the police officers treat them. And I hope some of the values from the past will guide to us to the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Michel. Santi.
Yes. Joining us next is Yunyu Shih. Ajo currently lives and works in Taipei. He graduated from the National Taiwan University with a BA in History in 2007 and the School of the Art Institute of Chicago with an MFA in Art Sculpture in 2014. Ajo's work has always related closely to the space he is situated in. While he's constantly moving and relocating, his works are stored in suitcases and become archives, documents, and books that tell different stories. He explores the concept of memory while at the same time engaging in interactions between himself and the state apparatus. Instead of posing as a confrontational gesture, he tends to choose coexistence and the exploration of gray areas. Ayo.
Hi. Thanks for the invitation from Santi, Felipe, and Nicolas, and hello, Libia, Carlos, Michel, and Jorge, and Juan. So I think it's, for me today, I'm more of an audience expecting the conversation in more than that. What I can offer, I'm wondering, but I think the experience that I traveled together with Felipe and Santi and Nicolas really defines a lot of my experience here. Because there's a lot of things that I think I can share with, and I can having conversation with is based on my personal experience from where I grew up instead of what I see in Colombia. And I'm from Taiwan. We're very experienced in being colonized. We have been colonized by 4 countries. So I think we are more experienced than, than a lot of countries. And a lot of terms that we are familiar with as well. I grew up in a dictatorship time until 8 years old. And the cheating of elections we're so familiar with, and corruptions, army, the ideas of being implant a system of ruling is very familiar with. So as an artist, I think it's easier for me to share my connection with you all through a really short video link that I was sending to Nicolas. So maybe we go to the second page that in my slides, and we can start here and I'll explain the video. Okay, so these 2 kids are from the elementary school that I went to, and they're in the marching band of the school. And their job every day is in the morning, they will play the bass drum for the national anthem. And for me, it's a very, very strong suggestion here that, first of all, the anthem was an implant song for Taiwan, coming from 1949, which there's no revolution happened before. There's no any historical event happened in Taiwan. the national anthem was brought from China instead of happening in Taiwan. So it's an implant system, and everyone from school has to learn to sing it, to sing the song from nowhere. And the drum beat for me is a very strong suggestion for a bomb, as what it was meaning in the very beginning. So I think the video for me is a suggestion for me, like the young kids was learning and forced to be learning the ideas of country and from very young. And I think to recognize the ideas of this experience is the beginning of disobedience instead of like a real fight here, because I think in Taiwan there was no real revolution or a real fight. And I think it's very important. The recognition can help us to build a new ideas of how we can against the history and the force from the colonizations. So let's go to the next page. Yes, and this picture was from another video that I took with Felipe. I'm thinking about to share an ideas of a parenthood that we're learning rules that is actually from family instead of from the government. I think this happens everywhere. So we recognize several rules in the society instead of like a single law. So I think elderly is very important here, that we are learning how they react to the society. And I think this experience defines me how we a lot of conversation that we had is going to be happen today. So yeah, I think that's something I think I'm going to share today with everyone, and maybe we'll have in a conversation later. Yep. I'll skip the next image, and that's it from me today.
Thank you, Ayo.
Okay, so next up is Carlos Salazar Lermont from Venezuela. Carlos Salazar Lermont is an artist, curator, and art administrator with focus on performativity and socially engaged art. He has a BFA in sculpture from UNEARTE, a technical high school degree on fine arts in drawing and painting from the Escuela de Artes Visuales Cristóbal Rojas, and a dual MA in arts administration and policy and modern and contemporary art history in the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, with the support of the New Artist Society Scholarship. In 2014, Salazar Lermont started P3, Plataforma para Performance, organization to impulse the creation, dissemination, research, and education focused on performance art. In 2015, he created the International Performance Art Biennale of Caracas. Thank you, Carlos.
Thank you, Santiago. So, well, I would like to thank Sur and Micah for this invitation, which means a lot to me. It is an honor to participate in this event, which was such a distinguished company, especially Libia Bianibi, of whom I had the pleasure to be a classmate, same as Nicolas. And thank you, all of you who are here tonight, for sharing this space. Okay, maybe we can have like first image, Nico. Okay. My statement is a direct response to the prompt I was given, which is as follows. It's the same Nicolas read at the beginning. We are interested in exploring how, being part of this territory called Latin America, we are always bonded to others, being those who define us and who determine the rules of our game. How do we adapt? How do we respond? What strategies have we developed to subvert the dynamics? I have good news. These questions have been answered in a good extent by the book From the Good Savage to the Good Revolutionary by Carlos Rangel. Thus, I would encourage you to, instead of listening to whatever amateurism I could say tonight, just go and read it directly from those who know. However, since I was so generously invited to share my thoughts with you, I will try to summarize and complement the ideas that have been already said in this book a long time ago. Next image. Um, in first place, Rangel will agree to a certain extent that the other with caps O have defined us as a society and as a region. That say, I will remark that it has not been like this in its totality, and that we have participated greatly in the articulation and the circulation of these definitions. That say, we wonder, who is us? We, Latin America, are a very diverse group of people, races, cultures, classes, etc. And as you might imagine, some of these people have been participating more than others in creating the narratives that define us for better or for worse results. I think what Michel just showed is a good example of that. So, how many of these definitions exist? Who made them? To what end? From the good savage to the good revolutionary does an excellent construction of many of these definitions, which we do not have time to study in depth today, but could be reduced to those called by Rangel as, can you guess how? The good savage and the good revolutionary. In summary, the definitions addressed in the book are but different forms of the same idea. Latin America was seen by Europe as the place where the West will find its realization and the absolution of its sins by encountering with the good savage/good revolutionary, a pure, uncontaminated human soul who is going to lead humanity, and by humanity we always mean the West, to some sort of paradise. This could be the Garden of Eden or the perfect realization of human society, the Hegelian end of history. However, this narrative has a villain. If the hero is the good savage, the pure soul, the villain is, of course, the impure soul contaminated by alienated civilization, or its modern equivalent, capitalism. What becomes evident in Rangel analysis is that ideologies such as Catholicism, socialism, theology of liberation, populism, among others, are both the same mannequin with different dressing. All of them come from perspectives imported from the West. In other words, our rebellion against the West is the most Western thing we have. What are the implications of these worldviews? Let us see this example. Please play the next slide and play the video.
Los ricachones aquí siguen manipulando las cosas que yo digo. ¿Sí? Yo dije un día, ser rico es malo. ¿Sí? Y lo repito, ser rico, ser ricachón, ser burgués es malo. Y me afianzo en mi pensamiento cristiano en primer lugar. Por algo dijo Cristo. Más fácil será que un camello pase por el ojo de una aguja a que un rico entre al reino de los cielos. Ahora, lo que yo nunca he dicho es que ser pobre es bueno. No. Si una de mis más grandes luchas.
You can stop the video. Okay. So this is Hugo Chavez, the infamous dictator of Venezuela. He died in 2013. And what he was saying in this video is that he believes and he has a conviction that being rich, being wealthy is a bad thing. And he says that like as reassuring his Christian values. Then he starts saying something that, well, he doesn't say that being poor is good. But what I think is interesting is that this person who has over $500 million net worth without ever being a real businessman, like is actually there's another part of what he was saying. He was saying a quote from the Bible in which Jesus de Nazareth say, "Again, I tell you, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for someone who's rich to enter the kingdom of God." So this is like some evidence of how these values are the same, are linked. This concept has been welcomed by Latin America because of our narcissism. Oh, you can pass the next slide, Nicolas.
Los ricachones aquí siguen
Yeah, you can play the video. So these concepts have been welcomed by Latin Americans because of our own narcissism. We love to believe that, first, the reason why we have failed is someone else's fault, and two, the failure or this actually a virtue. This causes that We will never look at ourselves as the owners and authors of our own destiny. And second, we will keep avoiding economic and social success unconsciously. What can we do about this? We need to disobey. We need to reject the idea of the good savage and good revolutionary to be able to discover ourselves as complex hybrid identities based not in what we want to be or we wish we were, but what we really are. We need to assess our society in a systematic approach of trial and error based in numbers and facts, with less emphasis in the symbolic and more interest in the praxis. We have to disobey the myth. I believe our problems as Latin Americans will begin to solve when we can say without shame that we want to be wealthy nations, wealthy individuals, wealthy communities, and that we can do it by taking ownership of our own future. If we fail, it will be our responsibility. If we are defeated, it's not our adversary's fault. We need to own our victories and our defeats. We need to get rid of values such as humiliation, martyrdom, guilt, and misery, embrace those of strife, agency, comfort, and prosperity. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos.
So next up is Jorge Sarmiento and Juan Bocanegra from Colombia. Under the name Don Nadie, Mr. Nobody, as a third party between Juan and Jorge, they have participated as artists at the local level in Colombia, but their activity is also determined by their role as director of Art versus Space, a space that fosters debates on adversity and privilege, invisibilization and invisibility, insertion and desertion, desinstitutionalization and institutional criticism, and exclusion and self-exclusion. Don Nadie has assumed implosive processes as strategies to resist the ongoing and devastating boom of the art market in Colombia, and has partnered with artistic activation collectives in context of social protest and closed meetings of occult practices. Jorge and Juan, welcome.
Hi, thanks for the invitation, guys. And yeah, we basically are Don Nadie. In English, we can call us Mr. Nobody. No, I'm sorry. And my name is Juan Bocanegra, and my partner's name is Jorge Sarmiento. And we have been making art since 2006. We met in college here in Bogota. In a political, social, and cultural moment where things were shifting to the right wing pretty drastically. And in our newest context, the academy and the local art institutions felt in such a deep crisis that we have no longer places to be critic or to resist, you know? And,
if America had a Bush administration, here in Colombia we have Álvaro Uribe. So our art institutions became conservative, corrupt, and mainly merchandising places. That led us to imagine a world without them through some images like this one, please, Santiago. Like this image, one of the incendiary project. This was our grad project in college. This is the Gilberto Alzate Bendaño institution.
Yeah, it's one of the most renowned places in the cultural history of Bogota's contemporary context of art. And yeah, please, the next slide, please. Yeah, this is Study to Work or Work to Study. That is basically circular graffiti, a series of graffiti that we made in the National University for the reasons that we just told you about. And for those reasons also, 11 years ago, we created our own independent place, called Art Versus. Next slide, please, Santiago. And here we have been able to develop relationships through the so-called countercultural practices by one hand, and by the other one, we develop a deconstructive process within ourselves too. As these images that you were watching, this object is called Dying Time. and they are tied, woven like a rope, tied like gallows, and hang from the elderberry tree that grows in this space called Adversus. And it corresponds to our master's degree project called Death Project.
As a result of this kind of internal struggles that we have been meeting with those other really involved in occult spiritual practices. Please, Santiago, the next slide. We have in our space a presentation of esoteric orders, Luciferian studies, and release of grimoires and rituals practice such as the apostasy process, please. Pardon. And to finish this presentation, please, Santiago, the next slide. This is, we could show you this image of many results of an resistant exercise against the restrictions of civil rights during the quarantine. Basically, I get out to the protest meetings with a flag reference to an urban guerrilla group of the 70s in Colombia called M90.
Yeah, that's pretty much it, guys.
Awesome. Well, first of all, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Libia, Carlos, Michel, Ayo, Jorge, and Juan. For that, I couldn't stop taking notes. So I'm really excited for the second half of today's event, which we're just going to have a free-flowing conversation to kind of unpack all the statements and to expand the conversation and keep it growing. Before I also give the mic to Felipe, who is going to be kind of like facilitating this last part of today. Once again, I want to remind the folks who are in this Zoom call that you should feel free to unmute yourselves and ask any questions. You can also use the chat. And for the folks who are watching us through YouTube, same thing to you. You can use the chat, and Santi will make sure to bring those questions from YouTube into this space.
Bueno. Gracias. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, I just want to ask a little question. A lot of information, so yes, but okay. Nadie nace obediente. Yo creo que this is, nobody borns obedient, you know, like, and I was listening to you, and you know, like, first thing that we encounter when we are younger is not obedience, it's discipline. You know, the idea of discipline, and then something happens, you know, like indiscipline. But disobedience is like a more deep idea, you know, like it's go beyond this, you know, like I born with discipline and my response was indiscipline always, you know, like, but disobedience is beyond this. So I just know, I just want to know what is your take on this idea of actually disobedience, because we can be confused. And you know, Carlos also stated like this idea and was very clear with Chavez, you know, like a revolutionary, but God, Jesus, you know, like, what the fuck, right? What the fuck? So because I don't want us to be confused about the idea of disobedience with indiscipline, I want to know, how do you understand this? This is like my first question to open the discussions.
Yeah, I definitely want to jump to that, because I think that you grasp exactly, you say it much better than what I could have come up with. Yeah, disobedience doesn't mean undisciplined. Actually, I think freedom means responsibility. You know, means that you have to be the owner of your fate, right? And I think that in that way we need to then like start declaring our freedom by action. I mean, if we don't have it, in a more like formal institutional way. If we have oppression that's coming from institutions, it's coming from culture, it's coming from economic asymmetries, we need to start with declaring ourselves as free people, and stated by action. And this I say this thinking on primarily Venezuela, of course, because circumstances are so difficult there. But I also think in the people of Latin America, many different places that are having so difficult challenges to face, in which everything seems lost. Like, we talk from the city, we talk from Caracas, Bogota, San Luis. Well, what about the people in the border between Colombia and Venezuela, where the social workers are always like facing genocide by different like factions, right? That's so much different, so much harder than what I could have ever experienced, even coming from a country in a dictatorship. And the thing is, like, what does it mean for that people who to risk their lives? That means disciplines. Like, what you say, you have to mean it. You have to believe into that, because someone can come next day and take you away from your family, or take your family away from you, and so on. So, well, I'll just leave it by there, because I got really like uh,
I wonder also if it's a matter of scale. And like, I think the question is very interesting, and it's not one that I have a specific answer to, other than just continue to ponder on it. Like, is it possible that disobedience is the collection of indiscipline by all these other agents? Is it possible to scale up a level of this, or lose control over an enough, like a sufficiently big or sufficiently significant number of, maybe not number of people, or just like amount of willfulness, that it escalates to a disobedience? And I'm thinking about the examples made over the 2019 uprising in Chile. I'm thinking about the teachers unions uprising in the state of Oaxaca back in the early 2000s, and just like revolution as a moment where all these indisciplines and just people being like trying to push against this discipline just becomes untenable to the system.
Thank you. Juan, you were gonna say something?
Yeah, we want to say that something about the phrase that you were saying, that Nadie nace obediente, in a sense that no one burns obedient. We're just having a process of apostasy, that, if you don't know, is the process that you can renounce to the Catholic faith publicly. So the church, it has to erase you from his documents and stuff. So to us, that kind of obedience through your name and through the institutionalization of the name between the church and the state and your family is the first basic step, to release those charges more, because it's an exercise between you and the public, is really related. So that's in a part that's what we are, nobodies, but we are Mr. Nobody now. So we just flip the coin,
For me, the next step for this process, I would like to change my name, because I believe I think it's pretty ridiculous. Have a name of a saint or a king. Is It's absurd.
Yeah. So if you want to have that process with yourselves, we can show you how, or enable a relationship with us to make it happen. To rename yourselves. So it's a basic exercise that we are proposing to you if you want, anytime. So that's our answer.
Thank you. I actually, thanks to them, I did the same process. It was amazing. And so, Michel, you want to say something, right?
Yeah. I was listening to you, and I think it's a good, it's very good question to make like a difference. But to me, it's like it's how energy is in the process. I think probably undiscipline is the beginning of this. But when you are like stand up, you on disobedience, is because like undiscipline it is like far away from you. I mean, it's kind of like first and second state of something, of a kind of rage or whatever, or a process of change. But yeah, I think one is much bigger than the other one, and seriously, it is a point of no return when you are outside of this. And discipline is to me is not that hard to fix. But disobedience is like you're jumping over the piano. It's like, that's it. No, you don't care. No.
Thank you. I don't know if Ayu, you want to say something?
Yeah, I feel like I think it's allowed to respond from my view. I feel like the disobedience for me is a lot about like body, that you can feel free to use it and to enter different spaces, to have it again, because I think as what you say, that we're born with a lot of restrictions and rules, and to learn and to recognize the possibility of our physical body can be freedom, like in the ocean or in the forest. I'm not saying like okay, so free is, but from a lot of restrictions to the spaces that we cannot enter. And through the experience, I feel like because in Taiwan, that in the 90s and even in the early 2000, we cannot enter certain space in the forest because the government take control, or the oceans was governed by the government. So we're learning a lot of process of like we just enter the natural space. And I think the experience of like entering the natural space, giving our freedom to our body again. So I feel like the connection between physical body and disobedience has certain connections. And I don't know if it's connected to everyone, but for me, it's something really strong to me. Yeah.
Thank you, Ayo. Yeah, I think body is really something about, and I wanna connect the first part with a second, that actually Libia make me think when she say like, arriving to United States, you become like a label Latino, like you, or whatever you are, but like it's a stronger idea of identity. And for me, you see it when people go from Colombia and they hate vallenato, they hate food, and then they go there and start developing these things that they never developed, and also like wearing the soccer team shirt and some stuff, like and connected to the idea of Jesus. Symbols are beyond people, so that's a big problem, to break the identity. Like it's not something we can talk, it's something we have to control with in a different way. So I was googling the etymology of ideology, because I was thinking like the statement of this talk was Latinamerica is not a territory, it's an idea. However, I believe it's not about ideologies, for one reason, because we have no territory, it's impossible. Ideology goes to Chavez's idea basically, but for something else. In the middle of the word, logos, ideología, logos in the middle, right? We have idea, appearance, but logos means word, palabra, right? And when we talk about language, it's very problematic because also Michel stated with Nicanor Parra art, right? Like, we are not Latinos, we are not indigenous people, I mean, and we don't know we have no language. We use some language. If you come to Colombia, you will know they teach us to obey. They don't teach us to control. We don't have very good skills of language. Most of the people don't. So for me, I'm in a complicated situation now because I'm using two languages, is not mine. But so that's my question, like I don't know if it's a question, but like we cannot be ideological. We have to have an identity that's true, but it's very complicated because we have no language for one side. And then and the other part of the question is when you go to another place and then you become the idea of Latino America, that maybe you want to be a little far away from these stereotypes. So how do you understand this notion?
And Felipe, and kind of like picking up from what you were saying now that you're talking about, terms and the term of obedience, I feel like Julia, you have put a question over there in chat. So I don't know if you would mind introducing yourself and also putting the question out there at play with the group.
Yeah, the one on terms of like reclamation or the obedience one.
You can go ahead and go with the, well, you can start with the terms if you want.
Yeah, so I was thinking about, so I'm Julia, hi, she, they pronouns. I'm in the class Intercultural Practices. I'm a CP first year. And I was thinking a lot, specifically during Michel's presentation about the term mestizo, which is a term that was defined to identify someone who is born of indigenous and Spanish descent. So like together, it's like a mix in a way. That's what the term was developed for. And it's like thinking about when defining individuals power comes into play, who's creating the definitions, who's defining, but also the reclaiming that can happen in that. For example, the word queer has been reclaimed in a positive way and is reclaimed by the community, by the queer community. And we have taken that term and begun to self-identify with it in an autonomous way. And I was thinking, how can reclaiming be a form of disobedience? And if any of the artists have an opinion on this.
So Julia, just to synthesize real quick and correct me if I'm wrong, I want to connect a couple of dots there. So it's very interesting in the first part of this collective conversation that we started with Carlos talking about, we're free people and we have to embrace action, right? And then when that question was thrown out there, we had mixed responses, right? So Juan and Jorge were saying, like, we change our names, we renounce our Catholic name, right? Which is action at the level of the individual, right? Which is similar to what Ayo was saying, the body and the individual, right? But then on the other hand, we have Michel and Libia talking about, scale, right? This is not a talk about Wall Street. This is not a talk about stocks. This is not a talk about finances, but we're all familiar with what has been happening recently with the Wall Street bets, which kind of exemplifies a good example of what Livia was saying. Like how individual efforts can be scaled in very strange ways. Because Reddit is like this strange platform that wasn't created to liberate peoples. It's just a thing that occasionally was put into a situation and ended up to individual efforts being scaled up. And it's very interesting so far now that we're like in between the individual and the scale. And then Julia, you're coming to talk or to propose appropriation, right? Like taking something that, might be as Carlos was saying in the initial remarks, I'm
thinking a lot about I'm thinking about those terms being like colonizing, and then you're like appropriating your own colonization as a form of a disobedience and a form of radicalization.
Couldn't have said it better. Would like to hear the group.
Yeah, I will say that I'm a little stumped because I feel like it's at least for me, it's impossible to answer this question without applying a framework, an ideological framework to something that does not belong. So by that, I mean, as far as I know from my time in Mexico, like the word mestizo or the multiple words that were created to name different mixes of blood in the country are not necessarily, like most of them are not used anymore at all. And the term mestizo was never, or has never been a term that is negative. It's more as a classification of something. And when it was a negative thing, when being mestizo meant that you didn't have certain rights over like Spaniard-born people that lived in Mexico, that was what, in the 1800s, like, or before the revolution, the independence movement started. So for me right now, like, I cannot help to approach all these questions about which terms we use and how do we name ourselves from the perspective of having been born or raised in an indigenous community, which are very vastly different from the ways that Mexican Americans and immigrants that came very young to this country use the same terms. So here, the term Latinidad is not bad. It's a way of self-determination. It's a way of claiming, like, we are not part of this country, but we are not a part of the territories that we came from. But I guess that my point to this conversation is more of what happens when we override the historical nature of the term with somebody else's history and use of words. So by this, I mean, like, Black Americans and Black Latin Americans have a very different history of how race has permeated their terms. Whereas, at least in my experience in Mexico and being indigenous in Mexico, it has very little to do with how much blood you have. It has more to do with how you are raised, the traditions that you are in. So you may not have actual, like, I honestly, I don't know if I have Zapotec blood. I haven't made any analysis, but the fact that I was born and raised in the Zapotec community speaking Zapotec is enough for me to claim a heritage that I don't think belongs to someone who was not born and raised and who might have some Zapotec blood to say, like, I'm 116 Zapotec, therefore I am indigenous. So I don't think that actually answers the question, but at least it helps me frame a little more.
Yeah, I wanted to add something about like this thing of what is Latin America, etc. I think there is a very interesting concept of like non-essentialism. That is like what authors like Spivak will talk about, right? And it's like a strategic essentialism, strategic essentialism, which is approaching the terms less as a definition that is rigid and it has like ontological existence or status, and more than something that allows us to be flexible and to adapt our identities to the political needs. So in that way, sometimes we could talk about Latin America as a territory, but sometimes we could talk about Latin America as an idea, as as long as it works towards an end, right, of whatever political ends we are trying to move towards, right. And I want to add something to that, which is the disobedience, right? That's a term that sometimes I think it can be interchangeable with one that is very spread within the nonviolent activism, which is non cooperation. And I think I think it has like a very interesting nuance, the non cooperation, because um, it means that someone wants you to do something that is not necessarily what is in tune with your ideas, right? So sometimes it could be disobedience, but sometimes it's just something more like I mean, it's just that I think that this term address what you were saying, Julia, of like when are we obedient to ourselves or disobedient? So there's like this kind of like thing that starts to get like like entangled. But yes, the no cooperation, I think is a very important term because it has like all this framework between nonviolent resistance, and I think it's nice to get deep into that.
Yeah, I want to say like two things. Talking about like words, like the words that we use to talk about ourselves. In the process that I show you, we have a very complex way to talk about ourselves and to talk about anything. I mean, the language here in Chile, it changed very fast, and it changed a lot in different ages, different like parts of the city and the country. It's quite long. So one example, like if somebody says like because of somebody's doing something wrong on the street and call them in a rough way, that word like in one morning start to be our name for all of us. I know I don't know if you can get it. It's like, for example, one day some people start to protest at the metro station again, and one of the politics from the right wing called them pati pelao, which means without shoes. Like anybody without shoes can stop the transportation system, so we can't do that. So like after 2 hours, everybody start to change their name on social networks and start to talk like we are the pati pelados, so we are the people without shoes. So that kind of things here are happening very fast, so fast. So for us to talk about like Latinos, mestizos, criollos, whatever, all those words are past. Even the word that we will use the next week is past. It's past because we have no name. We used to call ourselves like the leftovers, like los que sobran, like no, this country never cared about us. So that is our flag, like the flag of the almost the 80% of the population here is that. It's like, okay, we don't have name. Okay, no name. So we are trying to build from there. I don't know if we can do it, but anyway.
Yeah. In our case, not to be a narrative or something about the things that we were saying, but it's very important to announce this archetype that is, or to give the light to this archetype that is called the shadow. Gustav Jung claimed it a lot of time ago, and is this like black space that is negative and historically is being in the shadow, in the dark side. And the proposal that we use to take over of that archetype is actually with the force of Lucifer. Lucifer is like this in the Christianity, this fallen angel. But if you make a mythical parallel for instance, in Greece, is Prometheus, that is called the bringer of the light. So it's not a dark archetype, actually it's a light one, it's the bringer of the light. So in the case of that you were saying, Julia, is just the way that someone can look to this concept and the other one can turn it around and make it a proposal force and not a reactive force, right? So, for instance, we are the directors of this space that is called independent space. And we are not independent, we depend of, make money and, sell stuff and be in the market, whatever. And,
but in a sense, we have named it independent space, art space, 10 years ago. What it means independent in that time is another thing for the art institution today. In that time, even it was disobedient. So it happens because a boom of the art market, and I think it was one reason for that we are now in the shadow in some sense.
Yeah.
We became occult for this. I mean, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, even art is super obedient because the market is ruling the way of being of the artist in our nearest context, Bogota. Even Bogota was like famous like 6 years ago in a lot of magazines because it was a city of arts and stuff, but it was the city of the art market, So that's a real, to us, it was a way to go to other places like the occult and the dark arts and the light arts of the market. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, I want to connect all of this with the shadow and the idea of the language Michel was talking about, because and actually like to complement also the spaces, the art market spaces that used to make Colombia like the spot for art, they are done, like a little crisis and they are gone. They were talking about community, they are talking about we love our neighbors, they are gone, like this, like you go to a neighbor, nothing, so it's very interesting to try to understand the language because it's very powerful. But again, second thing I want to talk is symbols, like about disobedience, because I think talking about the shadow, but what Michel said about language being ephemeral, something that we don't have to take as a pride, but something we can use and throw to the garbage every week. I totally love this idea of saying this is your like I'm your shadow sometimes, like what was the word you say?
Patipelado.
Patipelado, we use patipelado. So we are patipelado this week. Next week we can be something else. So that's really interesting. So I want to connect to something also Ayu was talking and Don Nadie were talking about institutions. Like and Libia was in institutions. So I'm very interested to have this conversation right now because in some ways, like we have symbols that. That don't represent anybody, just a little few amount of people from society. We in Colombia we're full of monuments nobody cares about and nobody knows about, like, and if you want to deal with this idea of who you are, I think you have to go first for the symbols, second for the language, and I want to know how to address this idea because Ayo, when he showed his image, when he came to Colombia, he didn't have a hard time to say, let's do this. We are going to take out the national anthem and we are going to play some recordings on top instead of having the full thing. And then we have this conversation also in our verses one time. We don't know the lyrics. We don't know what it says. And when you read it, it's like, oh, this is a lot of symbols and very powerful ones. So how to deal with this idea of symbols, Catholic Christianity, right? About with disobedience, like how about this idea of countries, Latin America, I don't know all of them, but some of them, full of symbols, full of statues, full of monuments that belongs to a very short part of society, even to other countries. How can you understand? And also towards institutions, is not institution a big problem because it is like a also like first world idea of institution came here, and the institution always conservative, like an idea of preserving something. So how do we deal with these notions? First, like symbols, state, but also the idea of institution being inside or out, inside and outside, or I don't know. It's a little open question.
Maybe
Sorry. Oh, Aju, you go.
No, Santi. Okay. I'll just jump first because I feel like for me there are two ways of it because for the society like in Taiwan we have a movement, let's call it. I think it's happening in Chile, in Argentina as well. It's the transitional justice that is like we are dealing with the martial law history and how do we deal with the dictator inherent statues and everything's everywhere and we don't know how to do with it. So it's kind of like, okay, we're talking about history and then reclaiming the authorship of the right of speaking about it. But for me, myself as an artist, I think humor and the joke was actually the power and how do we make connection with each other, because it's actually about how do you make the joke about it instead of itself. So the monument is there and then everything's there, the lyrics there, the anthem is there, but it's not to discussion about itself. It's about the way of making joke, and it's actually the way of making joke connect each other, connect me and you, connect me and him, and then we recognize each other even from a different culture. So it's actually the way of joke. I think it's also saying maybe it's for me saying the power of performance and action, because we see how they act instead of the subject itself, and then we recognize and we connect each other with the action itself. I think that's how I think the importance of responding.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think I can connect this with a comment that's coming from Dulcina Abreu in YouTube. She says, it's kind of when the normalization of disobedience can become a weapon for the perpetrator. And I think what Felipe was saying also about this idea of symbols and language, we have to understand them as tools in the same sense Julia was saying, it can be something for us to reclaim it, but it can also be a weapon used against us. I know in the academic practice, the idea of diversity has had many changes in the use of what it is. It's diversity, is the idea of inclusion, the idea of this has had many names, and in the end there are like aesthetical changes in the language, but they're not like changes that come from a structural place. And I think that is something really important to note in the idea that these words that can give us powers can also be used against us in recognition of the idea of Dulcina, that is also saying, sorry for this, taking the example of the streets of Chile last year and continuing Felipe's thoughts on institutionalized spaces. How do you all as artists feel about the function of the monuments now?
I would like to speak to the idea of institution, and I think it's crucial for what I was trying to state at the beginning of the conversation and how we see ourselves. I think that very often in our political conversation we speak about institution as like a structure that is made to preserve power and to oppress others, right? Uh, and yes, basically, yes, I think that summarizes the idea. And also we will think of institution as like a very like a Western institution, right? Like maybe democracy or state, like three powers. and so on. However, the institution in its most basic meaning is a conjunction of an association of people, who organize themselves to reach an end, right? And that might include a list of procedures, bureaucracy, methods, policies, and so on, right? So the institution is a tool for people to accomplish things, right? So SUR is an institution, right? That institution can be horizontal, can be collaborative and so on, but at the end of the day is a group of people who is joining forces to accomplish something. And for example, one of the accomplishments is this event that we're having today, same as MICA and so on. The Inca state was an institution, and it was not Western, it was Inca, and same as the Aztec Empire and so on, right? So, and actually, these institutions, through their needs of developing methods and technology to more efficiently do their everyday stuff, is how they develop things like writing. So it's actually these like the strongest institutions, the ones that had like more developed technology, and vice versa. So no coincidence that the Mayan civilization of 2,000 years ago had like this very well developed writing system that was then used by other civilizations that came after, right? So I think that for us, it's important to go back to these concepts and think differently, because I believe that actually we need to strengthen our institutional culture. We need to think what it means to have an institution, what it means to be part of an institution, and what it means to uh, to work with others, to collaborate, and to be part of a collective, right? And that can be in the more grassroots level and like horizontal level, but also in like more state level, because as we don't see the institution as an adversary but something that belongs to me and that I have the responsibility to look over them, I have more power and motivation to go over the politicians and be like, hey, like, I mean, I'm just gonna give a short example that's very recent, the coup attempt by Trump. What makes that so bad? It makes it bad because he is attempting against an institution that belongs to the Americans. And I will say that it belongs to me as well. I mean, as an immigrant, someone who still don't have like a citizenship or something, but I think that it belongs to me, because there is where people is going to discuss a lot of things that are going to affect my life, and I pay taxes too. So this guy was attempting to something that belonged to me as someone who's here without being born here, and so on. And as I feel a sense of belonging towards that institution, is how I can defend it and to demand that they do their job well, and to participate myself in many levels.
We here with Juan, we are thinking about this very context, because the professionalization process for an artist is pretty particular, because in a university, in the most conservative way, could be a process even against the disobedient particular thing that the artists have.
Yeah, like I don't know. For instance, the graffiti series that we showed you when we were talking about our process, it was related to this particular moment because we're talking in a university, in a college, and it's super strange because when people study arts in college, it's supposed to be a critical force and an artistic way, in an artistic way, through the institutional and university world that is pretty much has a scientific look of the world. It's super. It's really difficult to be an artist and to be compenetrate and to be related with others in a context that is super rigid. But in that way and in other ways, that graffiti that it was saying that study to work or work to study, it was an open question to the whole university and to question why do we really work, as and why do we study? It's to work, to be secular and to pay taxes and pretty much be normalized by the practices, or to be, a crack in the system, because I think that the arts is that kind of force in the academic world. Is not an obedient one. Except it's an emancipation of this amazing, strange shadow.
Can I actually answer a question? The idea of profession. Okay, so I wanted. This is really funny because we talked about it in class yesterday. The question was asked what the professionalization mean in art, as is art not a professional activity? Professionalization isn't in this context. So yes, professional can be referred to a actual professionalization, such as a doctor, a lawyer, a artist. But in this context, professionalizing, you can look at it in two ways. You can look at professionalism and deprofessionalism. And the best way that I love to describe it is to look at poverty and homelessness. Professionalization, when looking at the field of poverty and homelessness, someone will say that they are a researcher, they know all the knowledge about poverty and homelessness, but will never ask someone impacted. So professionalization in art looks similar to who people in power who are choosing the artists that we're representing inside of institutions, who's choosing the workers, who's choosing the arts displayed, who's defining terms. This is all professionalization because it comes from a standpoint of the structure that's in place that's academicized, such as, do you have an MFA? Are you able to work at this institution? Do you have the history and the resume that's built up to be that? As opposed to centering impacted people and saying that any impacted person can self-identify as an artist.
Julia, thank you so much. That's very key. And this is where I would like, connecting that, I would like to bring Libia into the conversation, because from here with the one in the group, I know that we're talking about a flexible idea of institutions and institutions that look in different ways and different shapes. But actually, Libia, you work at the Arts Alliance Illinois, right? And that is an institution that is, its sole purpose is to create policies, right? Which is what kind of like Julia was bringing into, right? Like who determines who gets what is accepted into a canon of art, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't know if you would like to kind of like take a dab into that aspect of the institutional side.
Yeah, I will say that this is just a very complex thing, because like after all, and I'm sure that anyone that has a professional activity is convinced that they are doing it for the right reasons. But the interesting thing about the Alliance is that we are an organization where focused on crafting and passing policies and initiatives that are friendly to the creative sector, which is basically anyone who, artists, organizations, and art audiences. So in this process, there's always like the easy way of doing it, which is exactly that. As Julia was saying, like we craft the policies, we decide like what is the best opportunity that we can seize on depending on the political winds. And like that definitely recognizes that there's a system, there's a hierarchy that we need to play. There's like the actual political winds with a D of how we're going to navigate and strategize something based on, so yeah, it's like an operation based on strategy. Whereas there's all this push, and going to back to what Santiago was talking about, that comes very closely informed from the movement to seek out diversity and equity and inclusion in all these in all this world, where the desire behind crafting set policies, or rather the engine behind it, becomes less about a strategy of achievement and more about a value-based system of what we want to achieve. So if we no longer care about what are the like easy, like low-hanging fruits that we can make in like quick claims of this is how we're winning, and we actually reorient ourselves into who are the people impacted, how do we like get in touch with them so that we can have a policy agenda that is crafted by that is community driven, and so all the wins are geared towards a value based in equity and liberation, where when the most oppressed among us are taken into account into policies, it just plays positively to the rest of us. So, but this still works under the system of the institutionalization of work. We still have full-time jobs. We're still like need to engage people through what is right and what is wrong, in the sense of like what is on brand, like how can the alliance say things and how can it not. So at the end of the day, I do think, and I know that this is like way less radical than a lot of the propositions from individual artists and other art spaces, but in the sense of working within the system to, but at the same time shift what motivates you, and that affects how you're actually doing the work. I wouldn't necessarily call that a disobedience, but I would definitely call it appending a system where we no longer go from the top down, defining who is poor, who is illiterate, who needs art, who doesn't, and it's actually informed by all the intersections that occur at a grassroots level, where arts is not necessarily just the gallery, but arts is the library putting on the puppet show that actually serves kids in the neighborhood. So very convoluted way of saying that I think that in this term of talking about what is a defined, like how to subvert a defined system of operating, for me, the use that I apply in like in my real life, it's less about opposing it, as in like I want to reinvent a way that we do things, where we no longer do policy through these mechanisms, but we just take care of our own in our own neighborhood, and more into like how do we just operate in what exists and the avenues that we know are achieved and already respected and like people understand, but it's shifted in a way that is value informed as opposed to like strategy based, which is
what I like about that, and I'll be very brief with this because I think Philippe, you have something to say. But what I like about this is that we started this conversation with this word, disobedience, right? And throughout the conversation, we have kind of like shifted this concept. The way that it was proposed at the beginning, it assumes that there's a static self and then there's a static other, right? And then that the act of disobedience is kind of like a one time, one directional thing, right? It doesn't address the complexity of all these things, you know. And throughout the conversation, we have come to more a term of Carlos mentioned strategic essentialism, but the way that I'm adapting it is strategic positionalism, right? Like every situation is asking for a different position that you have to be in with it ins and gains, and I like that because that ties to what you were saying. You know, it's kind of like blending those two things. You know, like how through strategic planning. I hate that word. Coming from the arts admin background, it sounds awful. But how through strategic positions, you know, you can have the impact of the disobedience. So I think that that's very, very powerful, and it's kind of like we're all moving on that direction collectively.
Yeah, I wanted to add a little bit and also ask a little bit Ayo about institutions in Taiwan, because I'm very curious about this idea also of the building you take down, and how is this discussion happens, you know, when you make it, and maybe there has to be institution. But I wanted to add something that Juan and Jorge was saying, and in Colombia is very different a little bit, because this is not Mexico. This is not anything. I think maybe we can be compared to Venezuela a little bit now, but not before. So there's no spaces here. So the only spaces are really strong institutions, which is very problematic. So actually, the other day we were in one of them questioning the art that was inside a little bit, because it was like about gentrification and the community inside the Jewish people that is gentrificating the place, you know, and it was very complicated. So my question, and also, yes, we are kind of an institution sur now, we are trying to be, but it's confusing too, because we have all these questions, which thank you, Livia, for like opening our minds a little bit with this. But also I wanted to touch another thing, and it was like with the professionalization of art. In my experience, a lot of good artists I study with, now they are very obedient, you know, like they become lobby, they work in the ministry, you know, like they do a different career that is not art, you know, like, and they learn, which also is problematic, at least in the university level, that if you cannot pay university, you are not an artist, you know, like, and it's so problematic that if you have no undergraduate, you cannot do a master's, you know, like they receive people from different disciplines, but the artists that live in the life, you know, like the life, what is basically most important, you know, materia prima, chaos, you cannot get inside, you know, this is power, you know, like this is connecting power with power with power with power. So this is problematic in the education system as I see it in arts, because arts is not like a job. Like I don't see it like that. I see it like my life every day, you know, like breathing in and breathing out. And of course it's part of works I make, but it's everything. So it's a very problematic situation in that sense. But
can I jump in, like, to just follow on that thread? It's also very much a power-based strategy from a government very interested in taking control and maintaining like a somewhat unified discourse of what is art or what kind of art is allowable. And I say this from a different perspective. Like in Mexico, there's a tendency to professionalize craft, indigenous craft, where you have to be evaluated by government employees to define, like according to a certain rubric, to define if your work is native enough to be considered an indigenous craft. And if you are not native enough, then your craft is not eligible for all the governmental subsidies that exist to maintain alive, like centuries old knowledge of material or of technologies and material knowledge. So, and when you get to a point where not only are you expected to have certain degrees, but when the government itself is crafting cultural policies that are determining how much is enough to have a certain credential, that is completely divorced with how your knowledge is passed, how your knowledge is gained, and divorced from the life that modern beings have. So for example, in the case of indigenous people, what Mexican government does is that it doesn't take into account if you learned your craft from someone who is not your family. So if you went to school, that's not good enough, because indigenous people are supposed to be just like have this knowledge in the air, in the ether, that they just absorb. So learning it from school is actually desacralizing, that's not even a word, or like it's anathema to like how indigenous wisdom exists in the world. So it's the opposite, but still the same intention of this is a control of what we want in Mexican craft, Mexican indigenous people, Mexican indigenous creation to look like, because this is how we have shaped our identity to the world. And anyone who innovates and anyone who is willing to move beyond or away from it is not good enough to be supported by this. Like Mexico has like a very strong background and was born from socialist ashes. So it comes from that, like the government trying to support certain practices. And in this way, the way that you're speaking, when you are expected to go to school and define certain characteristics to be an artist, and therefore I assume be eligible for grants and scholarships, perhaps, it's the same level of control. So what I'm interested in here is how like the opposing each other, like requiring to go to school or requiring to not go to school, become the same measure of control. So disobedience, I don't even know where disobedience goes in these ways. And like that. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was thinking the way I've been responding to it in my own life, but there's also no right way to be disobedient and no right way to figure out how to respond to these things that have such large questions, is deprofessionalization. Because I'm still going to school. I'm still I'm getting an MFA right now. So I am becoming professionalized as we speak. Literally in this room, all of us sitting here in a lecture is professionalization. And so the way I look at it is the deprofessionalization means to actually redistribute your knowledge, take power away and redistribute it. So how do I take my professionalization and dismantle it by redistributing it? Redistributing what I learned about grant writing, redistribute what I learned about the curatorial museum, redistribute what I know about access to these spaces, and how does that become a form of deprofessionalizing and a form of disobedience in a way, because then I become a source of free knowledge. And then the people who I are giving that knowledge to become a source of free knowledge. Whoa, Meg said free knowledge at the same time.
And the interesting thing to me in terms of this conversation about what you say, Julia, is that in the terms of Latin America not being an idea, is that when you have all these measures of control in place that are exactly opposing each other in the country, you have people and practitioners whose way of disobedience looks exactly the opposite. And that's what makes Latin America be so difficult in terms of creating a cohesive narrative. And that's why all the conversations happening will constantly oppose one another. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's so difficult to be Latin American and talk in the United States, because that opposition cannot work when you're talking about a unified country or a unified identity.
I would like to say something about the idea of free knowledge. And I just strongly disagree. And I think that's a little bit what my statement at the beginning was about. Different from Felipe, I do consider being an artist my job. And that means ethics, right? When you are a professional, for me, professionalism means a series of ethics, an ethical code, right? And ethics means both like attitudes towards the other, but also towards yourself, like moral attitudes. So I think that for me, it's important to think that being an artist is my job, and it's not only my job; it's my main job. Like everything else I do, even if I might make more money than being an artist, I think it's important for me to consider that being an artist is my job. And of course, it's a job that is in tune with my main interests, like moral, political, social, spiritual interests, right? But it's still my job, and it's my job because of that. Like all these other stuff that are immaterial values are the reason why I chose this as my main job. But if I don't give art my status of a job, I will never get the compensations that I deserve for being an artist. It could be in terms of payments, in terms of treatment and respect to what I do and to what I do, to what I make, and to what I think. That's a then jump into the knowledge part. knowledge is something that is not, it doesn't come from the trees. It's produced by workers. So as such, knowledge is both a product and a service, right? And the professionals of knowledge are workers that, like, for me, it's like similar to being like a baker. A baker works every day to give you bread so you can eat and live, right? Like you can survive in a more like physiological way. While, but also the baker has to do it in a way that gives you some kind of pleasure when you eat it that transcend the fact of just eating. Something that can actually take you to a place in which you connect with existence, which you connect with life, because that's what culinary arts make. It's not just feeding you so you keep alive, it's connecting you with your existence. So art is something like that, and culture and knowledge in general. We, as same as the baker, we produce this experience, and some artists produce knowledge. Not every artist produce knowledge, you know. And as such, we need to be compensated about that. And I think that just giving away our products and service is actually what I was trying to counter with my statement of the culture of poverty, the culture of giving things for free, the culture of just no. It's like no. I think that opposite. No, we deserve a compensation. We deserve payments and so on.
I don't think, or well, I think that there's a difference between the term being a professional and then professionalization are two different things. So like in any job you do, even or especially as an artist, you do want to be professional, but that's different than the concept of professionalization. And I also think that deprofessionalization doesn't mean working for free, like as in not getting compensated for when you do your job.
Yeah, I'm gonna hop on after Nia and say, I put it in the chat, but I think especially, and I don't speak for other countries, I speak only for America. Yeah, I think maybe yes, the term is confusing. It's possibly just it's one of those words that has like 10 different meanings. And in America, we have this idea that people have to work to obtain a certain status in society. And often the people who can afford to have higher education, such as having multiple degrees in something that can make you an expert at that topic, requires a lot of money. And so there's this idea that deprofessionalizing is kind of more so the idea is that everyone has the capacity to be a professional in something, whether they are classically trained at a higher education level in that topic. And so that's why I brought up earlier the AVAM, I think is a perfect example, because it's the American Visionary Art Museum. It's in Baltimore. It's been around for a long time. And everyone in that museum is not classically trained. They're all self-taught artists. And so it's the idea that like you can still be successful and still be wonderful and a professional at your job, but you don't have to have the societal constraint of having 4 different degrees in it. And I think a lot of us have this idea that we have to have an MFA to be a curator, which isn't true. Or you have to have an MFA to be an artist, and that's not true. And so I think that's probably the best way to explain it. It is, I think possibly just the term has a double meaning to it, and it's getting a little lost in translation.
I think I would also question the idea of compensation and labor and knowledge and where knowledge comes from. So, for example, Carlos, in your situation, you deem that your level of professionalization, your art, you come with a set of knowledge and skills, you should be fairly compensated. That is true. For all of your labor, you should be fairly compensated. But the question of professionalization, as opposed to professional, is saying that the systems that we exist under are currently defining a professional as someone who is like you, as opposed to someone else who claims themselves as an artist and who also claims themselves as having a set of unique knowledge that should be compensated, someone who's doing labor that isn't considered labor. And those people should also be considered to be professionals, to be compensated for if they want to be under their terms. So the idea is more that each artist should have the autonomy and the terms to define their labor and to define if they are a professional, as opposed to saying that everything should be like, as opposed to saying that your labor should be free to deprofessionalize. You know what does that make more sense?
Yeah, I think I understand. I think I understand. Yeah, and I think it's a market, right? It's like how you address the needs of the market, and that means it's like who demands the goods and service, who supplies them, who funds it, and all that kind of stuff, right? So I think there's where the question comes is like how can you create policies that can attend the demand of or create the demand from that public so the suppliers can actually have their products be uh, like create interest, you know. And yeah, and I think the reason why that happens is because we are a lot of artists, you know, we are a lot of artists, and there are not as many curators, and there are even less spaces and institutions, and then we go to like the top of the pyramid that is like museums and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's quite a challenge.
Carlos, I think you nailed it. I think that the term you put in the chat is probably my new word. De-MFAization is exactly it. And I feel like that's what we've been having this conversation for the past few days. And like, it's hard because that is a word that is already used, but de-MFAization is perfect. Because it really is like this idea that, and it's also this joke that like floats around social media of like, you get an MFA, but like what for? Like, why are we here? We all think that every day. Like, we're spending so much money for something, you know, and it's part of the experience and the people you meet. But like, you don't have to spend, you know, $200,000 on your education to be an artist. You're still valid in that. Some of us just choose to tank our finances.
Juan, you want?
Maybe the approach that we have is probably more structural. You know, when we talk about professionalization of the arts is the verticalization of it. You know, is being you know after a position, and after a position to make a bigger position. You know, and that's pretty much unfertile space, you know. It's not but you know, horizontal and has rugosity and it has life on it. It seems to be like a dead space. So it's, to be clear, is not to go to the center of the top of the scale. Is not to be in the bottom. Also, is not to be not grateful or not to gain money about the way you do things. Is just do it in a way that is ethic and is not you know, that's superficial about it. You know, when you put yourself above someone, it clearly creates a hierarchy that is not always good to the force that you're working with. You know, it's pretty much it. Because art to us is not a profession, but it's not a hobby. You know, when Carlos says is my main job, I don't know. I don't want a job. You know, I don't want to be so disciplined. I don't know. I just want to be living my life like as an artist in the whole way, not as a hobby or as a main job. Is a way to be, you know, and eventually you can. We've been in in a marketplaces, but also we've been in satanistic rituals, and it is just being everywhere, you know, not at the top or at the bottom. It's not, I don't know.
And maybe if the opportunity of being in a institution, maybe the position could be indisciplinate the system, and not the contrary way.
Yeah, it's too romantic to change the world being in the middle, you know. I think that in the nearest park, you can see the frontier, and you can go and then get the fuck out of there, you know, whatever you want. Be self-dependent.
Ayo, you wanted to say something about the institution, or I don't know.
This really totally bring back to my MFA life. I think we have a term that after the years that detox. We actually spend a lot of time to detox the school experience. But I was thinking a lot about the beginning conversation about like the government funding and the grants and everything, how they affect cultural building. You know, like government give funding, so everyone, artists or the organizations, goes with certain directions. And everyone was like trying to find a way that in the same time you are against something, but you are also accepting something, and then making an attitude. I think it happens everywhere, even no matter it's private funding or government funding, and no matter there's a school degree or no school degree. Well, I think we are all dealing with it everywhere. No, I thought so. It's just a very short response to Felipe's earlier question about like what is happening in Taiwan and the US, because I think government funding plays a very important role here in Taiwan, and every artist here is trying to find a position for themselves to deal with it. And for me, I try my best not to affect it by having government funding. So try to do things independently. So sometimes I call myself, professionally speaking, I'm amateur, but attitudinally speaking, I'm professionally. So that's how I kind of like reacting to it. But the other way is, this is also how I feel like I'm getting a little bit old, is that when there's a chance that you can affect an institution, you choose to revolutionize, call it wrong, or you get into it and trying to influence it. So now, like, I have a chance that we have around like 15 to 20 artists, and then we have a sort of like a group, and then we have chance to work with museums, and yeah, most of them working with museums to go into schools. We can use this museum collections to having workshops and school classes. And because museum education program has a lot of problems in Taiwan, and we're trying to use it as a new way. And it's very easy for us to, outside as an artist, that criticize the museum education programs. They are like super classical, and you know, the aesthetics program was like sort of like problematic. But in the end, we have like a super long discussion. We decided to throw ourselves in instead of like outside. And that's the moment when I feel old, because we don't complain now. We work with more than 50 schools now, and it was really tough. But it's just like the feeling of like, okay, this is the moment of like shifting from like the artist identity into like partially as a citizen. So I feel like it's like a half now, and there's a lot of like changing roles and then coming back and forth. So I don't know if this is relate about anything about like disobedience, but I feel like there's a shifting of like the doctrine of action. So yeah, let's respond to Felipe.
Michel, I don't know if you wanna say something about this.
Libya, I think Libya was going to speak.
Oh no,
Oh,
just to say that it was, I don't know, it just feels like going back to the very beginning, like the difference between indiscipline and disobedience feels so difficult to answer, because here we are, all of us, if not most of us, with master's degree. I hold now as a badge of honor, even though it's not that I didn't finish my thesis. So do I have an MFA? I'm an MA, maybe, I don't know. But the reality is that I chose to come to the United States because I knew that as an indigenous person in Mexico, I would never be taken seriously in the arts if there wasn't any other credential that I could attach to my name. So for me to come to Chicago and like try to get a degree from an American institution and go back home with that and trading in that currency would have been necessarily a part of just like the whole replication of the model and professionalization everywhere. And now, like in this conversation, because it's also a conversation that happens in every room, there are more than 5 people that went to art school. Everybody's just conflicted about going to art school, getting an MFA, what's the point, why did we do this? So it just feels like in the terms of this conversation, that feels like the indiscipline side of it. Like all this understanding of how the codes of the art world, or at least in the United States, work, and our desire to not play a part of it, but I just don't know where the disobedience goes. So I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, listening you guys, I remembered like some words from Nicanor Parra, once again, because all his family are artists, but all of them are poor people too. So his way, and the way how he talked about his way, was about to, like, when you are not rich, when you are not spending money from your family doing your art, like when you need to work every day to get your food and whatever, you should walk with 2 legs. I mean, one leg to feed yourself and the other one to improve yourself in your practice. So most of the people that I know here and our works with art, different arts, they used to do the same. Some of them make bread and paint. If they are lucky, they could like sell something. In my practice, I work with sound. It's not easy to work sounds, like to sell sounds. But anyway, the idea that I want to share with you is about, like, okay, it's my job, but probably I will need to do both things. I mean, the works that I've set on museums, I never get any single coin from the museum. They give me the space and I have to put my money that I got from another way to materials. Of course, they don't pay for my time. And anyway, but to me, it's a chance to show my work. Of course, I have a double job. Okay, I'm sleeping less than the normal people. Okay, I'm trying to create something that it will never be paid by someone in the Chilean context. But anyway, this is the only life that I got. So if I want to do some stuff, I will figure it out. How can I do it? So because the institutions and the education market and all the stuff that we were talking about is like, yeah, it's everywhere. It's probably the same. Where we are getting like more than 1,000 actors and actresses every year, and nobody goes to the theater. So how can you survive with this? Okay, some of them are going to work on TV, and then with that money are working on weekends and try to set the drama that they really want to work. I don't know if you can get the idea that I'm saying, like, but in our reality, we used to work in that way, like both legs.
Thank you, Michel, for that, because that brings us kind of like full circle. But before doing the full circle, Santi, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I just want to mention some of the comments that came up on YouTube. Carlos Ricardo Rusi says he loves you. And then Fraga says it would be helpful to name the ways in which institutions create exclusivity outside of expensive MFAs or academia as well, which is something that we've been talking about a lot in here throughout this, is the idea of how becoming part of this system also it's a way of us to reclaim the power, but it's also like excluding a lot of people that doesn't have, to be honest, the opportunity to go through this experience of the MFA.
And I will say one thing also, that is it's not about the pity of you can't, like it's not, this is for me, no, like for me it's like a going forward in many ways. In Colombia it's only one institution, the government. You can call yourself independent gallery, but you are getting some money from the government under a lot, so, and then there is this problem I see in the arts or in everything, like I know we all know going inside and going out of the institution all the time, right? But every time you go inside, I feel something is taken away from you, like a little bite, because it's a, like they are very hungry inside the institution. So after 10 years, you have nothing basically inside of your heart. I feel, like everybody say this kind of thing, oh no, I can go inside and outside. But then something changing inside, something is very problematic about going to institution. I used to think I can go inside and out, but then I realized how I feel every time I go inside. It was like, wow, this is a problem, and also, and I'm talking in the Colombian context, when there is only one institution, the government, like, and they are telling you basically many things inside. So I see this is a very hard problem. I don't know how to address it. I just put like this notion and this question, but I just wanted to say this little thing.
Yes, Meg.
Yeah, I wanted to go back to the idea of the kind of knowledge is free that Julia was talking about. And part of the reason why I chose MICA was the community involvement. And we have a community arts program and we have a social practice program. And then, we're all, the people in this chat are all in curatorial practice. And there's all these different avenues of inclusion, especially within Baltimore, and how we can include young children and people of like in the community and local artists. And I think that starting, and part of the reason I chose this program was to say that, going and trying to kind of find fame in New York City and do art in those spaces is not always necessarily relevant or helpful. And starting off in a community area and actually being impactful and showing how art can change at a small level and in a local setting can be just kind of a step in the right direction to showing that, art is for anyone. And I think that children often, we teach kids that art's kind of like a fun class, and then it goes away. It's something that becomes like an elective, and then it disappears. And so I guess part of what I admire about MICA and our community is engaging other people and trying to engage and really spread knowledge to our community. And I think that is something, that knowledge is free idea we talked about earlier, is something that's so crucial regarding art, because it really is like, it feels like it's in a bubble and it can be unobtainable sometimes, and who gets to obtain that knowledge. And so giving that, the community a sense of even just something simple such as a mural, it reminds people how art can impact a community and how, you can be a part of that. And I think that's super important just on a local level. And remembering that as artists, we don't always have to thrive to kind of change the world. It's like one one little step at a time. And I think we have these big goals to like, oh, I want this exhibition to be really big and I want people to see that, but it doesn't have to be everyone. All it takes is, you know, not to be cliche, but like it only takes one person. So just helping in kind of in a small space.
Thank you, Meg. We have to close now. Like, I think we pass more time. I would like to keep the conversation because very interesting. I just want to say, if someone want to say like a last thing for closing, anything, or we just stop just right here. I don't know.
I would like to say one thing, and then just I'll shut up, I promise, and then we'll do final remarks. But thinking about what Meg was saying about, you know, individual action and small scale, and also what Michel, what you said of this is the only life I've got. That kind of like brings us full circle, right? Like when we were giving the framework for today's talk, we talk about the technological disobedience, that is this thing from Ernesto Rosa, right? And this thing of technological obedience wasn't born out of like didactic exploration or like as a hobby or even as a profession, but rather as a survive or die strategy, right? It's in when Ernesto is talking about the technological disobedience in Cuba, it's just like, you know, he usually uses the analogy of animals that are starving and they're like so desperate that they just have to figure it out somehow, right? And I know that throughout this whole, oh my God, it's 2 hours and 20 minutes. The conversation has been so good that I hadn't even noticed the pass of time. You know, like throughout this whole time, you know, we have talked about individual actions, and also we went to the other side about like scalable actions, you know, like systemic actions. We talked about the self, and what is the self? Is the self static? And we also talked about the other, and in a similar way, is the other static, right? What is the other? I want to bring back here what Carlos said in his opening statement. You know, our rebellion against the West is the most Western thing, you know, and I feel that so hard with so many things now that we're talking about DMFAs and professionalization. That's a thing, you know. But also throughout the talk, we talk about are we free people and we have to assume ourselves as free people, or are we erased people, right? And we have to start from that thing that was erased, that it's been trying to systemically being erased, right? And in this last kind of like section of the talk, you know, we talk about like being inside of the institution versus outside of the institution, right? And at the end, and at no point we were able to figure out like, oh no, so it's outside of the institution, and then think yourself as erased people, and then do everything from the self and scalable actions, and that's the formula, right? At no point we were able to reach an agreement or anything like that, right? The only kind of like strategy that at the beginning was portrayed as disobedience, but I like the mutation of it into strategic positionalism, is that, you know, like everything is in flux. Being born and raised in that strange territory that is called Latin America, it's always being in flux, you know, it's always being in flux about like, what is the flux of the past, what is the flux of what is telling you is the present, what is the flux of what is the inside or the outside. And as Libia was saying, you know, that's what creates so much friction, you know, and in between individuals, in between communities, and in between nations in the strange territory, right? So the only thing that I would like to leave out there as kind of like a low-hanging fruit for everyone is just think about this strategic positionalism. You know, it's not a fixed position, it's not a fixed identity, it's not a fixed formula, but rather this fluid nature. And I'll shut my mouth.
Okay, anyone else wanna say?
Yeah, we just want to point out the specification of the situations. You know, we have to be specific about everything we do. You know, if you are in a upper position, you have to be ethical about it, even if you are in the marginal position. But it's just to point that out, to be specific about it, about the things that you are doing. That's pretty much it. Thank you for the invitation also. Right.
Thank you for being here. This was amazing, and And thank you for all the ideas, you know, like the idea of institution, like what Carlos and Livia saying, this is a Western institution. This is not your institution. Then I was thinking, but I don't know who I am. How can I develop an institution? I will do the same, the one I know, which is this terrible one. So it was amazing. I'm not going to talk too much because I know the time and everything. But I think also site specific is like, you know, art. Basically, this is the idea. Understand where you are and what you're doing in that point. You know, like this is very, 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 very important, I think. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I hope we can meet again and have another discussion. Like this was totally amazing for me. Gracias, muchas gracias de verdad.
Lo mismo, gracias muchachos.
Gracias a todos.
Same time.
Gracias.
Yeah, muchas gracias.
Gracias.
And it was so fun. It almost felt like a bar, something like that. We were like so excited. Speaking of all these things, I love it. And thanks for everyone who's watching as well.
And for the intercultural practice students, stay on the call. Gracias, gracias. Gracias, Michel. Gracias a yo.
Muchas gracias.